The snow had begun to fall early that morning in London, soft flakes gathering along the edges of the marble steps that led into the prestigious Langford and Company Financial Tower. Commuters hurried past, heads bent low, their breaths fogging in the December air. Amid the blur of gray suits and steaming takeaway cups, a boy in a faded hoodie and scuffed sneakers stood motionless near the entrance, his dark hands tucked deep into his pockets. His name was Noah Reed, 17 years old, sharp-eyed, and hungry in ways that went beyond food. His hoodie bore the faint logo of a charity school long closed down, and his shoes, 2 sizes too big, had seen more pavements than classrooms. For 3 nights now, he'd slept under the overpass near the Thames, his backpack serving as both pillow and reminder of everything he owned in the world. But this morning wasn't like the others. He was waiting, watching. Inside the building, beyond the revolving glass doors, walked the woman whose name dominated the news, financial magazines, and charity galas alike. Victoria Langford. Blonde, poised, and impossibly composed. She was the CEO of the empire her family had built over 3 generations. Her white wool coat swayed as she moved, and the world seemed to part for her. Security guards straightened, assistants followed like shadows, and even the elevator seemed to pause a little longer as if in respect. From where he stood, Noah's dark eyes followed her reflection in the glass, his jaw tightening. He didn't blink. The first time Noah had seen Victoria was not on television or a magazine cover. It was 2 weeks earlier, in person, when he'd been mopping floors at the Langford Tower as part of a short-term night cleaning job arranged by a shelter worker. He remembered how she'd entered the lobby that night, heels clicking, phone pressed to her ear, barking orders in a clipped British accent. She hadn't noticed him then, crouched near the marble pillars, invisible as dust. But Noah had noticed her, and when she spoke a name that night, a name he'd spent his whole life wondering about, his world stopped. "Send the charity fund report to the Reed Foundation," she'd said sharply before vanishing into the elevator. Reed. The name had echoed in his mind all night like a haunting drumbeat. His last name. He'd gone home that night, if you could call the abandoned bus depot home, with shaking hands and a storm in his chest. He didn't know how or why, but somehow this woman, this untouchable, polished business queen, was connected to him. He'd seen her face again on a charity broadcast the next day, the banner beneath her reading, "Victoria Langford, founder of the Reed Children's Initiative." That word again. Reed. Coincidence? Fate? Or something else? He wasn't sure. But the way his mother had whispered that same surname in her final hours, begging forgiveness from a man she never named, that couldn't have been chance. So he had decided. He would find out, even if it meant walking into a world that didn't want him there. Now, 2 weeks later, he stood at the threshold of that glass fortress, watching her car pull up, a black Bentley gleaming beneath the gray London sky. The driver jumped out first, opening the door with precision. Victoria stepped out, her gloved hands clutching a leather folder. Noah took a deep breath, his pulse pounding so hard he could hear it. This was it, the moment he'd imagined every night, staring at the ceiling of the shelter. He walked toward her. A security guard stepped in front of him immediately. "Sorry, lad, this is private property," the guard said, holding out a hand. "I just need a minute," Noah replied, his voice trembling but steady. "Please, it's about her." He nodded toward Victoria. The woman barely glanced his way at first. She was already halfway through the door when his voice broke through the air. Clear, desperate, almost trembling with something more than courage. "Do you know who I am?" That stopped her. For a fraction of a second, Victoria Langford turned, her eyes narrowing. Her assistant froze. The guard looked confused. "I'm sorry," she said coolly. Noah swallowed hard. You should. My name's Noah Reed. The air between them changed. The guard blinked, uncertain. Victoria's lips parted slightly, but her expression hardened just as quickly. Reed? She repeated, her tone flat. I don't know any Reeds. Now, if you'll excuse me. You do? Noah cut in, louder now, his voice echoing across the marble. You've been running a charity with that name for years. A few people had stopped to watch. Phones hovered discreetly. The guard stepped closer, whispering for Noah to calm down. But he didn't move. Victoria's face remained unreadable, though her fingers clenched around her folder. That foundation is named after a child who... She stopped herself, catching the slip before it landed. Noah took a step forward, his eyes glistening. A child who what? Her silence was answer enough. The security guard finally moved to pull him away, but Victoria raised a hand, a small gesture that carried the weight of authority. The man froze mid-step. Let him speak, she said quietly. And so, in front of the glass doors of Langford Tower, under the falling London snow, a boy told the woman who owned half the city that she was his mother. Later, in the silence of her office, Victoria Langford stared out at the skyline, her reflection faint in the glass. She hadn't heard that name, Reed, spoken with such conviction in 17 years. Not since the day she signed the adoption papers. Her assistant hovered nearby, hesitant. Should I call security to... No, Victoria interrupted softly. Leave him, for now. When the door closed, she sat down slowly, the weight of memory pressing against her chest. She opened her drawer and pulled out an old photograph, a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket, the inked name on the tag, Baby Reed. She had told herself she'd done the right thing back then, that her reputation, her career, the board's scrutiny, all of it justified the decision. But now, with that boy's voice still echoing in her mind, something inside her cracked. Downstairs, Noah sat on the cold stone steps, the city moving around him as though he were invisible again. His backpack lay at his feet. He wasn't sure what hurt more, her denial or the look in her eyes that told him she knew. He pulled out the only photograph he had, an old picture of his mother holding him as a baby. Her smile was tired but real. On the back, in fading ink, was a single name written in delicate handwriting. For Victoria, in case he ever finds you. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window of her penthouse overlooking the Thames. The city lights shimmered on the river below, reflecting the image of a woman who had everything, except peace. Her phone buzzed with a message from the board. Reminder: Charity Gala for the Reed Foundation. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Her eyes lingered on the name Reed, the same name now standing outside her tower, in the cold, demanding to be seen. She whispered under her breath, Noah Reed, what have I done? In a cafe across town, Noah watched the same charity gala ad on a cracked TV screen mounted near the ceiling. His eyes hardened as the commercial showed smiling children, fancy donors, and the woman who claimed to help kids in need. He clenched his fists. If she wouldn't acknowledge him privately, then maybe he'd make her acknowledge him publicly. And with that thought, he pulled out his notebook, the one filled with all the clues, all the research, all the dates he'd tracked down over the past month, and began to plan his next move. The charity gala would be his stage, and this time the whole city would hear his story. Noah stood in the shadowed alley behind the gala hall, the soft hum of Chicago nightlife seeping through the cracks of the brick walls. The night air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain on asphalt. His fingers tightened around the photograph of Victoria he had carried in his pocket all week. The image of her, smiling at a charity event over a decade ago, clashed with the powerful woman he now saw on the city's biggest stage. That smile hid a lifetime of decisions that had hurt so many. Yet tonight, Noah knew he had a chance to confront the truth. Not with anger, but with compassion. Noah had walked past countless opportunities in his 18 years, drifting from shelter to shelter, cafeteria to bus stop, surviving without recognition, always on the fringes. Yet, when he saw Victoria Caldwell at the gala that evening, her elegance and poise masked a memory he could never forget. His world stopped for a moment, the memories rushing back with a vividness that startled him. It was 11 years ago, on a rainy evening much like this one, that a young, frightened Victoria had stepped in to save his life. He remembered the icy wind that tore through the Lincoln Park streets, the thugs who cornered him after his shift at the diner, and the sense of helplessness that had made him freeze in place. And then Victoria appeared, a young girl, barely 8 years old, yet fearless, willing to face the danger to protect him. Her courage had altered the course of both their lives. Noah's thoughts were interrupted by the soft patter of heels on the wet pavement. He looked up to see Victoria approaching, her golden hair glistening under the gala lights, her sapphire gown flowing like liquid in the soft illumination. She was unaware of the storm of emotions Noah carried with him: gratitude, awe, fear, and hope all intertwined in one knot in his chest. "You made it," she said, her voice warm but formal, her eyes scanning him briefly before her attention returned to the crowd of supporters, reporters, and city officials. She did not yet recognize the boy who had once given her the courage to act, the same boy who now carried the weight of his past and the hope for a better future. Noah stepped forward, every step careful, deliberate. "Victoria," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the soft music wafting from inside. She turned, startled by the gentleness in his tone, seeing for the first time the young man who had been shaped by her actions years ago. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do I know you?" "Yes," Noah said, pulling the photograph from his pocket. "You saved me 11 years ago. You risked everything that night on Lincoln Park. You don't remember me, but I've never forgotten you." Her breath caught. Memories flickered in her mind like candle flames in the wind. Tiny, fragile, yet impossible to ignore. The 8-year-old girl who had acted without thinking, driven only by instinct and heart, had grown into the woman standing before him. And in that instant she understood. Tears pricked her eyes as she extended a hand to touch his shoulder. I didn't know. I was just—" "You were brave," Noah interrupted gently. "Braver than anyone I've ever met. And that night, it changed me. It gave me hope when I had none. It showed me that someone could care even when life had given up on me." For the first time in years, Victoria felt the weight of her own courage reflected back at her. The gala, the applause, the wealth she had worked to build. All of it faded into insignificance against the memory of a small boy, frightened and alone, whose life she had chosen to protect. The moment was interrupted by the soft chime of the event coordinator calling for Victoria to take the stage. She hesitated, torn between duty and instinct. Noah smiled faintly, sensing her conflict. "Go," he whispered. "But remember, the courage you showed me that night, it's still alive. It's changed lives, including mine." Victoria nodded, tears slipping freely down her cheeks now, and turned to face the crowd. She walked with poise, but inside, her heart raced. Each step toward the stage was a step toward reconciliation. Not just with the past, but with the young boy who had reminded her why she had chosen to be brave all those years ago. Noah watched from the shadows as she began her speech, recounting the story of her youth, of the challenges she had faced, and the belief that one act of courage could ripple outward to touch countless lives. His chest tightened as he realized how far their journeys had carried them, both separately and intertwined. After her speech, as the applause faded and the gala continued, Victoria slipped quietly through the crowd toward the exit, searching for the boy who had reminded her of everything important. Noah met her outside, where the night air was cool and damp, and the city lights glimmered like distant stars reflected in puddles. "You changed my life," he said simply. "You changed mine too," she whispered, her hand finding his. "And now, maybe we can change the world together." Noah nodded, feeling the weight of possibility settling around them. The streets of Chicago had once seemed cruel, unyielding, and endless, but now they carried hope, promise, and the knowledge that courage, once sown, could grow into something extraordinary. Together, they walked toward the car that would take them back to the foundation, back to a life dedicated to helping others like Noah, like so many children who had nowhere to turn. And in that moment, both realized that family wasn't just born. It was chosen, nurtured, and built from acts of bravery, love, and the willingness to see someone when no one else would. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening, as if reflecting the new chapter about to begin. A story not just of survival, but of hope multiplied, courage returned, and the undeniable power of one small act to shape a lifetime. The following morning, sunlight broke over Chicago like a promise. For the first time in years, Victoria woke before dawn not to review market reports, but to meet a young man who had become a mirror of her conscience. She brewed a pot of coffee herself, something her staff hadn't seen her do in decades, and waited in the quiet of her glass-walled office overlooking the river. When Noah arrived, he was dressed in borrowed clothes from the shelter. A crisp shirt, slightly too large, and shoes that pinched his feet. Yet he walked with quiet dignity, chin lifted, eyes steady. Victoria gestured to a chair. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't," he said, settling across from her. "But I think we both deserve the truth." The conversation that followed unspooled like a confession. Victoria spoke of the night 17 years earlier when fear had dictated her choices. How her family's scandal, the board's threats, and her youth had collided into a single decision she'd regretted ever since. Noah listened in silence, jaw tightening, until finally he said, "You thought giving me away would protect your future. But maybe you were protecting me too." Her eyes filled. "I told myself that for years. I needed to believe it." Noah looked out at the skyline, the glass towers rising like verdicts. "Maybe we can make it true now." The idea that had been growing between them since the gala took shape. They would expand the Reed Foundation beyond charity dinners and glossy brochures. It would become a living network, education programs, art therapy, safe housing for street youth. Victoria had the resources. Noah had the understanding of what those kids actually needed. As they planned, laughter slowly replaced the tension. When he teased her about her perfectionism, she rolled her eyes. When she corrected his grammar mid-proposal, he grinned. A partnership was forming. Not mother and son yet, but something honest, raw, and new. By midday, Victoria's assistant poked her head in, stunned to find the famously reserved CEO sketching diagrams on a whiteboard while a young man paced, gesturing with a marker. "Should I order lunch?" she asked hesitantly. Victoria glanced at Noah, who shrugged. "Pizza?" The assistant blinked. Victoria Langford ordering pizza in the boardroom would become the first small legend of the new foundation. That afternoon they visited the city's South Side shelter where Noah had once stayed. The halls smelled of bleach and stale bread, the kind of scent that clings to poverty. Kids peered from doorways, wary. When Victoria stepped inside, heels clicking on cracked tiles, Murmurs rippled through the room. A reporter's camera would have loved the contrast. The billionaire and the barefoot boy returning to where it all began. But there were no reporters. Only a woman named Miss Calhoun, the shelter's director, who folded her arms skeptically. "You here for a photo op?" she asked. "No," Noah said quickly. "We're here to listen." And they did. For hours, they sat with teenagers who spoke of hunger, broken schools, and nights spent hiding from police sirens. Victoria took notes until her hand cramped. By dusk she looked exhausted, mascara smudged, but alive in a way Noah had never seen. Outside, as they waited for their car, she whispered, "You were right. They don't need another gala. They need a chance." Noah nodded. "Then let's give it to them." That night, news outlets buzzed with headlines about the mysterious partnership between the icy CEO and the unknown young man seen at her side. Speculation bloomed, but neither cared. They were too busy drafting blueprints, reaching out to city officials, and building what would soon be called Project Horizon, a pilot campus for education and mentorship. Still, shadows lingered. Members of Victoria's board questioned her motives. "This boy," one of them said in a closed meeting, "has no credentials, no background check. He could ruin everything." Victoria's reply was calm, almost gentle. "He already saved everything." The motion to remove her as chair failed by one vote. That evening, she found Noah on the rooftop garden of her building, staring at the lights stretching across the lake. "They tried to stop you," he said. "They'll keep trying," she admitted. "But I don't run from battles anymore." He smiled faintly. "Guess we both grew up." They stood in silence, the city wind tugging at their clothes, two silhouettes against a skyline reborn in color. For Victoria, it was the first moment she truly believed redemption was possible. For Noah, it was the first time he understood that forgiveness could feel like freedom. Months passed in a blur of meetings, late-night calls, and city permits. The abandoned Westlake industrial lot, a skeleton of steel and cracked concrete, slowly transformed under their watch. Noah worked alongside volunteers, paint-streaked and sleepless, while Victoria juggled investors, city politics, and her own doubts. The media had begun calling her the Iron Phoenix, but she didn't feel like a phoenix. She felt like a woman learning to walk again after years in heels that never truly fit. One afternoon, as construction wrapped up, Victoria noticed Noah teaching a group of teenagers how to build wooden benches. He laughed easily, sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. For a moment she saw the boy he must have been, wide-eyed, hungry, fearless. Something in her chest tightened. She walked over, voice soft. "You're good with them. They remind me of me," he said, setting down his tools. "Except they'll have a better start." Victoria nodded, but her gaze drifted to a reporter lurking near the fence. The press had been relentless. "Every day someone calls this a PR stunt. I don't care about the headlines anymore. But you, don't worry about me," Noah said, his tone gentle but firm. "I didn't come this far to hide from cameras." That night, they unveiled Project Horizon. The grand opening was modest by corporate standards. No champagne towers, no designer gowns. Just students, teachers, and the faint smell of fresh paint. Victoria stood at the podium, her voice trembling slightly. "I built empires once," she said. "But this is the first thing I've ever built that feels human." Applause echoed, raw and real. Noah stepped beside her to speak, but as he looked over the crowd, his throat closed. He saw faces like his own, black, brown, scared, hopeful. "When you grow up invisible," he said quietly, "you forget that someone can still see you. Today we see each other." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Victoria turned to him, tears glinting. For a fleeting second, they looked like what they were, mother and son, standing together against the ghosts of their pasts. But triumph never lasts long without a test. 2 weeks after the opening, an anonymous exposé surfaced online. It claimed Noah had fabricated his background, accusing him of lying about his education, exaggerating his charity work, and manipulating Victoria for money. Within hours, headlines exploded. Langford's protégé exposed as fraud. One read, "The Foundation's board panicked. Sponsors froze funding." Victoria called Noah immediately, voice tight. "Come to the office. Now." When he arrived, she slammed a folder on the table, printouts of the article. "Tell me it's not true." Noah's face drained of color. "Of course it's not true. They twisted everything. I dropped out of school." "Yes, but I never lied about it." "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd have looked at me the way you are right now." Silence thickened between them, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting. Finally, she said, "We have to handle this carefully. The Foundation." He stepped back. "The Foundation? What about me? I'm not a headline, Victoria. I'm your son." Her breath hitched. For weeks they'd skirted around the word. Hearing it now shattered the composure she'd built her life upon. "Noah, please." But he was already walking out, fury and heartbreak crashing in his chest. That night, rain lashed the city. Victoria stood alone in her penthouse, the storm outside mirroring the one inside her. She replayed the moment he said, "I'm your son," the way it broke something sacred. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Ms. Calhoun, the shelter director. It was a video. Noah, soaked to the bone, standing in the middle of the Westlake lot, repairing a damaged roof beam with his bare hands. "Says he doesn't care about articles," Calhoun wrote. "Says he's not finished building." Victoria watched, tears mixing with rainwater on the window. The next morning, she walked into a live press conference without makeup, without her usual armor. "The man you're calling a fraud," she began, voice steady, "is my son. And if you think compassion requires a resume, then maybe the fraud is all of us." Her words swept through the city like fire. Sponsors returned. Volunteers doubled. Project Horizon's doors reopened the next day. And when she found Noah in the workshop, covered in dust, she said simply, "You were right. They needed someone to see them. I needed someone to see me." He looked up, eyes tired but soft. "So what now?" She smiled faintly. "Now we build again." Winter came early that year. Snow powdered the streets of Chicago, softening even its sharpest edges. Inside the newly completed Project Horizon campus, the air buzzed with quiet energy, laughter echoing through bright hallways, the smell of cocoa and chalk dust mixing in the air. Noah stood at the edge of the main atrium, watching a group of kids decorate a Christmas tree with recycled paper ornaments. Each had written one word on theirs: hope, home, freedom. One little girl, no older than 8, tugged his sleeve. "Mr. Noah, what's your word?" He paused, smiling faintly. "Maybe forgiveness." The girl nodded solemnly, then hung her ornament beside his. Across the room, Victoria watched, a quiet pride flickering in her expression. She'd traded her designer suits for simpler sweaters lately. Her once impeccable hair now streaked with silver, she no longer bothered to hide. The tabloids had moved on, the board had come around, and the city now whispered her name with something like respect. Not for her fortune, but for her change. Still, some ghosts never left easily. Later that evening, as volunteers packed up and the snow deepened outside, Victoria found Noah sitting alone in the rooftop garden. The same spot they'd stood months ago before the storm. "You should be inside," she said softly, wrapping her coat tighter. "I like the cold," he murmured. "It reminds me I'm still here." She sat beside him, their breath mingling in the chill. Below them, the lights of Chicago shimmered against the dark lake like stars caught in motion. "You know," she began, "I used to think strength meant building walls, protecting myself from anything that could break me. And now I think it's about opening doors instead." She hesitated, then added, "You opened mine, Noah." He turned to her slowly. "And you gave me something to walk through." For a long while neither spoke. Snowflakes drifted down, catching in Noah's curls, melting against her gloves. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an old, weathered envelope, edges yellowed with time. "I found this in my father's archives," she said. "It's the adoption form, the one I signed the night I left you." Noah's chest tightened as she handed it to him. Her signature was still bold, though smudged by a water stain that looked suspiciously like a tear. "I kept telling myself I signed it for your sake," she said, voice trembling. "But the truth is, I was afraid of not being enough." He stared at the paper, then back at her. "You are now." Tears slipped down her cheeks. Quiet, unguarded, human. "Can you forgive me, Noah?" He reached out and took her hand, rough from work, warm despite the cold. "I already did, the day you walked back into that shelter." And with those words, something inside them both finally broke and healed. Weeks later, Project Horizon launched its first official scholarship program. The Langford Hayes Initiative, dedicated to children who'd been abandoned, displaced, or forgotten. The city mayor attended, but the true applause came from the kids themselves, who shouted Noah's name like a hero returning home. During the ceremony, Victoria insisted Noah deliver the keynote. He stepped onto the stage, the bright lights reflecting in his eyes, the audience a blur of faces, some rich, some poor, all listening. "I used to think pain made me weaker," he began, "that my past was something to hide. But standing here, I realize pain doesn't break us. It teaches us how to build better." He glanced toward Victoria, who nodded through tears. "My mother once told me walls protect us, but now we know doors do more. So if you've been hurt, if you've been forgotten, remember this. You are not a mistake. You are the beginning of something beautiful." The audience rose, clapping, some crying openly. Cameras flashed, but neither of them noticed. In that moment, the boy once abandoned and the woman once heartless stood together. Proof that redemption doesn't erase the past. It transforms it. That night, after the gala, they walked together along the frozen riverwalk. The city lights danced across the ice, golden and trembling. "I never told you what I named you before the adoption," Victoria said quietly. He smiled. "I thought they named me at the shelter." "They did. But before that," she hesitated, voice catching, "I called you Eliam. It means belonging to God. I thought it was my way of giving you to something greater. Turns out, he just brought you back to me." Noah's throat tightened. He looked out at the shimmering skyline, then at her. "Maybe he wanted us to finish what we started." They stood there, side by side, the snow falling thicker now, until the city seemed to fade around them. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you for coming home." He turned to her with a faint smile. "Thank you for building one." 2 years later, the camera would fade in on the same rooftop garden, now lush, filled with wildflowers and laughter. Children ran between raised beds of vegetables, while Victoria tended to the roses, dirt under her fingernails. Noah, older, more confident, walked across the roof holding a folder, blueprints for a second Horizon campus in Detroit. Think the city's ready for another one? He asked. She laughed. I think we are. They stood together, overlooking a skyline bathed in morning light. The wind carried the distant sound of children's voices, a harmony of futures being written. Victoria looked at him, pride softening her face. You know, I used to think redemption was about erasing mistakes. And now? He asked. Now I think it's about turning them into miracles. The shot would widen. Mother and son framed against the sunrise. A symbol of what forgiveness can build when two broken hearts choose to rebuild together. And as the screen faded to black, Noah's voice would echo in narration. They say home is where you start from, but sometimes it's also where you end up once you learn how to love again.